Hey everybody, Brett Tadlock here, TN Artist. Welcome to my channel. Today's painting is weathered beach rocks. I just really needed to practice painting some rocks, so I decided to do this scene. I started out by painting some just random rock boulder shapes, and then create a clipping mask above each one. Each one of those is created on a separate layer. Then a clipping mask layer on top of that, and then just taking the oil brush and smudging in some reddish brown and light brown colors to kind of start indicating where the light's going to come from and what I'm looking for. And then taking some brown and going over top of that to start laying in some shadows and that kind of stuff, and just kind of go through it. If you've seen my other video on making rocks, this is kind of a similar process for doing that. So where I basically just lay in the colors with the clipping mask and then take the smudge tool and use the industrial brushes that are in there and just kind of tap the iPad to make the smudge brush activate but not smudge. It just kind of distorts the shape a little bit and gets what I'm looking for. So that's eventually what I'll get to, but right here I just wanted to kind of lay out the shape of the boulder, get a feel for where the cracks and the crevices would be, and just kind of you know, get that in my head exactly what I wanted to go for and play around with that, really just the kind of the colors and the shapes. And so, as always, you've heard me say 1,000 times with all of my paintings, I build in layers, and that's really texture and color layers as I'm processing it and getting everything laid out. And so that's what I was doing here, was just laying all the colors and the shapes and the highlights out to really kind of cement it in my head. I didn't really have an image to work from per se, and just wanted to lay down some colors and lay down some ideas. And so when I'm doing that a lot, it really just has me play more. So right here's where I'm doing the whole thing of tapping in that brush, that smudge brush. And you can see how it really breaks up the shape and gives it some random texture and creases and crevices. Then on top of that, I can look for the areas to start adding highlights and to start adding shadows and so forth. So I've got that one kind of done. Now I'm going to go to the next shape and change the color a little bit and tap it in. You'll also notice that I do some of this and then I undo it. Part of that is because sometimes doing that tapping gives you such a random shape that is almost photographic, because really, I mean, it's just taking an image and stamping it more than anything else. So I didn't want it to be too, I guess that texture to be in there too much, you know. There's that kind of that fine line where it's painted versus just stamped, and I didn't want the stamped as much. So I just kind of cut it back. The nice thing about doing this as well is that, you know, if you're using the clipping mask into the random shape below that, is that you can then go into that random shape and erase part of it and start moving it around. And then you can go into the layer and add to it and twist it and turn it with the warp tool or just the transformation tool. And so that's what I did with those. And then another boulder, and you'll notice that the colors of these are changing slightly, and that's what I wanted to do. I wanted it to be like, okay, these rocks belong together, but they're not exactly the same rocks. And when I got these to where I wanted it and to where I was starting to kind of get an idea of the shape and the placement, then I started playing around with a few other ideas for laying it in. And I knew that, okay, I want this to be on a beach scene where kind of the beach is in the background, and have an idea for that. So I decided I'm going to lay in some more shadows, and then once I get those kind of where I wanted it, I'm going to start laying in some clouds and a horizon line. And again, that's the nice thing about working digitally, is that I can create a layer that goes underneath my other layers and then just start building behind it instead of having to paint around it so much, and get that feel for it. So again, just playing around with the shapes, the colors. I did use right here, I created a layer over top of the rocks and set it to overlay so I could lay in a little bit different colors on top of that. This right here is just literally the gouached paintbrush and scrubbing in some lighter blues over a darker blue and getting that laid in. Now what I did right there, which was kind of quick in this sped up version, was I actually made a copy of the rocks that I have, and then shrunk them and moved them around and started painting over them to lay in rocks in front of those other ones, because I didn't want to spend the time to actually just paint the same rocks again and again. But instead I wanted to use that as my base to start playing around with it, and then lay in the ocean behind it and start laying in some other rocks for these rocks to be sitting on top of and playing around with that. Now the water back there is just a light blue brush with the oil brush and the gouache brush randomly going in shapes and thinking about the waves and stuff like that. I have a couple different videos on painting waves in the ocean, so I'll make sure to link to those as well. And then once I started laying in the highlights, I needed to lay in some cast light as well, some reflected light. So that's kind of that bluish light you see in the shadows. That would be the light reflecting off of the boulders themselves or off the atmosphere, and kind of going through all of that. So that's what I'm doing here, and it really starts trying to pull it away. And then once I've kind of got that, it's time to start really pushing and pulling the shadows, adding cracks and crevices, and kind of pushing and getting that light dark kind of play back and forth with it. So that's what I'm doing here. And then once I've got that done, you can see where I left those kind of blank areas in the ocean there. I knew I wanted to put some other rocks out in the water, so that's kind of what I did, was I just painted around where they're going to be, knowing that I would create a layer to start adding those rocks in to paint them as well. So really playing around with some of the lights and the shadows. And this is kind of an overcast day where you might have some of the light peek through. And I wanted it to look like there was shallow water that's coming up to these rocks. So you'll notice I put some of the brown underneath there with some of that greenish blue, so that you can kind of see maybe the rocks peeking over it, and then set them into the water by having foam come over top of it and just keep, so the water looks like it's moving around it and over and through it. So it really gives it that feel of being rocks within the ocean as far as that goes. So just kind of, again, playing around with the highlights. I'll add in a few highlights in the water to start giving it a feel and a little bit of a pop of light hitting it, and some last minute details. And then the one rock there, I decided to fix that because it looked kind of weird, like it had a cavity going into it, and I thought, that's kind of odd. So let me just kind of flatten out that boulder a little bit. So anyway, just a real quick lesson, just a reminder that everybody needs to practice. Everybody needs to take time to try and get some stuff down on the paint and push yourself to practice on what your weakness is. Rocks sometimes can be mine, so I wanted to practice on it and show you guys kind of that thought process. I hope this helped. Make sure to leave a thumbs up, comment, subscribe, hit that notification bell. I have more stuff coming out, and come over to Patreon. Join me over there for really in-depth lessons and everything else. So thanks so much again. I appreciate you.